In my ongoing struggle for relevance in the anime YouTube sphere, yeah, take your chance to laugh it up while you can, since that's a market so saturated it's practically a rain cloud dumping its load across the site, and I'm getting washed out in the deluge of reaction content. I've decided to try and get ahead of the curve, so to speak, by tackling a show that's not just releasing its third season sometime within the next millennia, in my estimates, but one that's primed in my sights for a deeper look beyond even the anime. I'm killing two birds with one stone on that front with this video, and it's not like I haven't already dipped my toes in the waters by talking about this already, because apparently this is just a franchise I can't bring myself to quit. So follow me as I talk about industry trends, history, and build a foundation for my church of crackpot theories that paint the entire anime industry as a globe-spanning cartoon villain out to steal all of your money. But before you go ahead and type out your furious comment down below about how I skipped over insert superfluous plot point here, this isn't a review of the franchise at hand, but a history and cultural impact retrospective on how this influenced or was influenced by the Isekai genre. And today's series is about as influenced as it comes, by looking at what other creators were doing and outstaging them at their own game. And that's right. Today we're looking at Honzuki no Gekkokujo Shisho ni Naru Tame ni wa Shuda no Erande Iraremasen, or for you English-only plebs, Ascendance of a Bookworm. I'll do anything to become a librarian. You're never gonna guess how this one came about, but let me just blow your mind with it started as a web novel on Shosetsuka ni Naro, like every other current isekai franchise in existence. So way back in 2013, around the time the bigger stories in the genre were underway and picking up steam, Ascendance of a Bookworm started up on the platform where it ran until March 2017. Probably one of the biggest things separating this author from previous is experience, and not just in writing. Kazuki Miya, much like the main character of this franchise, is someone who just enjoys books, and has been writing for a number of years from her days in middle school to rekindling her passion in 2013 when she just had some more time on her hands. She also contributes to a magazine discussing issues surrounding libraries in Japan, so there's that too. This is a person who values the written word quite a bit. So while the web novel began in September of 2013, the first volume was printed in January 2015, a little over a year later. That tells me that there's plenty of material in what's essentially the rough draft to edit into the light novels. In October of that same year, part 1 of the light novels was getting adapted into a manga, which took almost 3 years to wrap up, when the same span took the author 6 months to wrap up in the light novels. Parts 2, 3, and 4 are currently running, which is incredibly confusing to anyone just sticking to the manga, but gives a good jumping in point for those who read the books, or are reading the books to fill out what the manga hasn't yet covered. To clarify, Toho Books, a sister company of Toho Entertainment, is the company publishing both the manga and light novels. This is a company that's been woefully left behind to the point that their anime productions in the last decade have been this and Sorceress Stabber Orphan in 2020. Oh, and their print department's a who's who have never heard of it. That's not make or break or anything, especially when the author's talents are what make a franchise stand out, but that's also not the most reassuring when it comes to promotion. Luckily for us, an anime adaptation made its way onto the scene in fall 2019, a mere 4 years after the light novel started, and I'm not making this up, but 20 fucking volumes were released. There was absolutely no fucking around getting this stuff written. Handled by Agia Do, a company who consistently releases competent work that's generally not flashy, but still well animated, this could have easily faded into obscurity with its lack of impact early on. However, being saved by its story, it received heaps of praise for its refreshing take on Isekai with its less flashy gimmicks and grounded story. A season 2 made its way onto the screens in April 2020, essentially making a split core with conflicting takes on whether it's actually season 2 or the rest of season 1. I'm falling onto the side of it being season 2 though, due to it picking up with part 2 of the novels, where the first season ended with part 1. So, Ascendance of a Bookworm. It's an isekai, obviously, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. And crazy enough, I actually get to flex my opinions confidently for once, since I'm caught up on the light novels, not just the anime. We've got a girl, another world, amazing power, which we'll just call her big brain for now to avoid spoilers. But how did she get there? Well, it's quite simple. She died in an earthquake that caused an avalanche of books to crush her in her home library, leading to her waking up in the body of a little girl in a shitty slum section of a city with technology and knowledge on par with that of the Dark Ages in Europe. for exactly why she's there isn't really important to the story. Whether it was gods or even a little girl with rampaging magic reaching out, it's more left to audience interpretation, so let's not get bogged down in motivation. What does matter is that she's finally in a new world, after achieving her lifelong goal of becoming a librarian, only to die and be shoved into society that's not even literate, let alone having a thriving book economy. While that's sort of par for the course for an isekai, dumping a character into a world while hand-waving it away for the audience, this series lacks information. Though it's fine, the protagonist is just as in the dark as us, and it's not exactly pressing when simply living to see tomorrow is a struggle for her. I've already touched a little bit on what this world is, but to be more specific, it's a low fantasy medieval European setting. Yes, smug light novel readers, it is low fantasy, because for the majority of the inhabitants of this world, magic isn't a common thing they deal with. In fact, it takes until the 7th episode for magic to even be recognized as a thing in this setting. Or Volume 2 for the books. Other than that, carriages are seen as an extreme form of luxury, paper and ink are unbelievably expensive, and cleanliness is beyond lacking, with regular bathing being almost unheard of. Marriages are usually arranged, and moving up in social status is incredibly rare for commoners, with a strict barrier around the nobility so there's practically no way into that caste. Yeah, stop before you type. Note the word practically there. So while this series is a fantasy world and one that uses the tired trope of a medieval European setting, it takes time to settle into it before introducing the more surreal fantasy elements. That tells me that even though this is using a familiar cliché of the isekai genre, it wants to explore it rather than use it for a shorthand. But another hallmark of the genre is an isekai protagonist typically steps into that world and makes it revolve around them by becoming so influential and powerful, everyone has to befriend or pay attention to them. How does this handle that? Well, simple. The main character here, being someone who loves to read, knows a lot of information, as well as has practical experience doing home crafts. This means that she can apply her knowledge of creating what we would consider quaint hobby goods, but in this world, are actually luxury items that influence trends. Her cooking information is particularly valuable, but the main thing here is her drive to create a printing industry so that she can fulfill her goal of becoming a librarian, revolutionizes the world and draws people to her by happenstance. It's an effect of her desire and goal, as opposed to being coincidental, because people tend to also gather around these protagonists. So with that, we've nailed our core aspects. This person reincarnated in another world, dealing with her situation and how she's changing it, leads to massive waves being made, and thus the entire world eventually revolving around her. But how did this stand out in the medium? Well, the reincarnated genre has been going strong for a long while before this series hit the scene, but where most use the character's memories and experience as a shortcut to being amazing, this one has the character suffer backlashes for introducing such advanced ideas. It's not just that she can do math easily and has amazing language comprehension, since Japanese words don't automatically translate. In fact, that makes her look weird, and people avoid her for that reason. Not only that, but plant-based paper's introduction leads to problems with the vellum industry, changes in ink lead to ink craftsmen looking for her, as well as changing the standards of beauty on a whim sends ripples through society that impact the story and characters. These are elements that are glossed over in most other isekais, but here it shows the author thought about how these would impact the story, that the character's actions have consequences that impact her negatively. It's honestly kinda sad that praising effective use of a core aspect of the reincarnated in another world story is something that I feel I need to draw attention to. But aside from that, the series is just done incredibly well in its short run. The light novels have sold over 4 million copies, which is about 160,000 copies per volume, though light novel sales aren't flat, with earlier volumes selling more than the later ones. I've also said before that raw sales aren't a good indicator, especially with this particular franchise's fast-paced release schedule. As far as I can tell, parts are finished together, allowing for volumes to be released every 3 to 4 months. So that 4 million number was around volume 23, and for that reason, I tend to put more stock in the audience's reception to the series, because if it sells well and has a solid reputation among fans, that's a good indicator to how well it's doing. Having ranked number 1 in 2018 and 2019 in Kono Light Novel ga Sugoi's annual rankings, and number 2 in 2020 and 2021, shows not just that this franchise is beloved, but has a sustained interest. Further, the anime had a fair amount of acclaim considering its middling studio, being nominated Crunchyroll's Best Fantasy Series in 2020. so it's definitely got some bragging rights. The takeaway here isn't that this series is just well liked, but that its understanding of how to tell a story using isekai tropes resonated with audiences enough to capture its recognition. I'm often flippant and dismissive of this genre, and that's because I've been doing this for a while, but I've also seen these tropes enough to recognize when one knows what it's doing, using these shorthands to not skip over why we should care, but to elaborate on the character's situation and struggle is something all isekai should strive for. And you know, that's what Ascendance of a Bookworm did. And with that, it's happened to become one of the standout isekais in recent years, giving hope to audiences that this genre isn't quite dead yet. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks, like voting on what I do next. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Nadeshiko for their continued support. Thanks for watching.